Hello everyone, welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm Dr. Anthony Mazzella. On this channel, we go beyond labels and symptoms to explore the inner, often unconscious, emotional world behind narcissistic and related personality patterns. In these short clips from the full podcast, you'll get a clear, compassionate, psychodynamic insight into behavior. Whether intense feelings live in you or you're watching them in someone you care about, the goal is the same: to understand what's really going on with the emotions and approach them with perspective, compassion, and room to breathe. Here's a short clip from the podcast that highlights what this looks like in real life.
I think that's at least in the work that I do, is I try to get people to that, is to really ask questions in the session that, things like, well, the person that has had the affair, asking them, okay, what do you think it feels like for your partner right now?
Mm-hmm.
This thing has happened. So what's going on for them internally? What would you guess that's like for them?
Mm-hmm.
And so that really begins to change the dynamic a little bit to hopefully elicit some empathy with each other around that.
In my field, the psychodynamic word for that is mentalization. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's the capacity to not just reflect on one's own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, but the thoughts and feelings of somebody else.
Right.
That's complicated stuff. So I really appreciate you saying that. And I can't emphasize enough how much I also appreciate, because for the listeners of my podcast, they hear me talk about this stuff all the time, like becoming curious, trying to understand your partner's or somebody else's inner world. But to hear it from somebody like you, outside of me, right? Someone who's built a successful profession and podcast around this, hopefully lends a little bit more credibility to something that I've been saying, because you and I may think this sounds very reasonable and makes sense, but the unfortunate piece is there's a lot more out there in sort of the social media world that what I would say oversimplifies this, and it's very comforting and comfortable to blame somebody else,
Right.
that there's a bad guy in the relationship. I'm virtuous. I'm always there. I've been a good wife, again, in this prototypical example, and he's the bad guy. And when they come in initially, and I'm sure you see this as well, right? There's a lot of, again, this is what we call, this is part of splitting, by the way, and we see a lot of splitting like that. So when you're advocating, I'm just saying it in a different way to drive it home for anybody who's listening, is a more integrated approach, which unfortunately is a little more complicated as well, because now you introduce thinking of somebody else's thoughts and feelings, but also trying to get to know somebody and their inner world, which is not easy, because now that's a level of closeness that relationship may have never had, right? Because if it is a narcissistic relationship, right, which we both, I think, would agree, and to some extent exist more in fantasy than reality. That's the whole cycle of idealization and devaluation. So really getting to know someone is grounded in reality, which pulls them out of the fantasy. No easy place to be. That's not easy. But
Right.
So let's even go one step back. Do you, again, in your work with these individuals, do you find there's anything in particular, if we could say there's like a narcissistic partner and a non-narcissistic partner, even though I think that's a little bit arguable and gets a little more complicated because it's not that black and white. See, that's part of the splitting as well. That means one partner is bad, the other one is good. But putting that aside just for a moment, is there something that you find that typically compels people to get in this kind of relationship? Like when, let's say, the non-narcissistic partner comes to you, I think my husband is a narcissist. Is there any thought about, if in fact he does have these characteristics or these tendencies, is there ever any thought or consideration of what was so appealing? What attracted him to you? Or what was even going on inside of you at that point in your life when you entered into a relationship like this?
Right. Yeah, I think, kind of in my way of thinking about things is I think people tend to pick partners that somehow seem familiar. And so if a person has come from a family where maybe there are narcissistic tendencies, or parents that were narcissistic in some way, that seems familiar. They kind of get the rules behind that, and they know how to respond. And so there's kind of this unconscious, I guess, attraction to that kind of person.
Yes.
But on the flip side of that, people that are narcissistic can be very charming, and they can be very particularly when a relationship is developing, being able to say all the right things and being able to play into a person's needs and being able to do a lot of love bombing and that sort of thing. And that can just kind of build the attraction. And it's, I don't have any way, I'm sure there are people that could be classified as narcissistic, that they go into it of just thinking, okay, I'm going to win them over. I'm going to pull them into my side. But, and I think there are also incidences where they do it kind of unconsciously. That's the way they operate with people, is that they learn how to manipulate people. And they do it not only in their primary relationships, but probably many of their other relationships as well, in
And
their
they do that
workplace.
unconsciously. I just want to underline that it's not, maybe sometimes it's more that malignant type of narcissism where there is clear motivation to do this. But oftentimes, at least the people that I see in the cases that I study, it's more what you just said, Gordon. It's an unconscious motivation that they're trying to get something from this person, but it's not like they have conscious malignant intent. And you see this so frequently because when you start to show them the impact that their behavior had or how it can be interpreted in different ways, they're pretty stunned, actually, like sort of befuddled even sometimes. Like they just don't see it, but when they see it, and that's part of the rewarding work and has to do with the healing process, which we'll save for maybe part 2 of this, okay? But when they do see it, it is quite shocking to them because, like you were just saying, it's not always at that conscious level of awareness. But go ahead, I jumped in because I just wanted to highlight that because it's so easy just to fall again into that trap of, look at what he did. They intentionally manipulate you, and that's the reason you need to get away because they're evil, right? So just trying to loosen that image up a little bit.
Right. When they're faced with life struggles within relationships, because that's where it happens is in relationships, or just constantly in conflict or constantly in struggle with people, and then becoming aware, okay, what's the common denominator? Well, hopefully the narcissistic person will recognize, oh, this is about me, and these are things that I can begin to work on and change. So
just like an example of that would be something like, I'm imagining this as you were saying, that something happened developmentally along the way. And this is just one way to define narcissism, again, because it's so complicated. But one way to define it is that their self-esteem is precarious. In other words, that they don't have a solid sense of self, a solid sense of identity. So if that is precarious and they don't know how to feel good from within, right? Because they never had that kind of environment where they internalize whatever. We won't go again into too much theory, but then of course they're going to be looking for that externally from their environment, and that's where that whole word of narcissistic supplies comes in. That they need constantly they need something from their environment to shore up their sense of self and their sense of identity.
Right.
So let's say you do get in this relationship, and you said, "I do feel good. I feel good helping." Why would you start to resent it over time? I mean, you're getting something that feels good to you. Like, what happens there, I guess, internally that you would start? I mean, if you don't want to make it so personal, Gordon, that's fine.
No, that's fine. No, it's well, I think that what happens is the helping becomes unrecognized and also becomes expected. And so then there's the resentment that builds around that. It's kind of like, it's kind of like I give and give and give and, get nothing in return. I don't get rewarded for that, because I think ultimately any human behavior is that the reason we do anything that we do is there's some perceived payoff for doing it that particular way. And so, being helpful, as a kid, you learn, okay, you're helpful. Oh, good boy. Get the pat on the head, and that makes you feel good about yourself.
Yes.
But if you if that goes on and on, and you don't get that reciprocal, okay, reward, or you've done this nice thing for me, let me do something nice for you, kind of thing. That's where the resentment gets built in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. That makes complete sense. And I would add just one other thing to it as I was listening, which is oftentimes if you really are with a partner who has these narcissistic characteristics, at the end of the day, they have a hard time accepting the help. So it's not even that they just, what you said, Gordon, is true. They may not reciprocate, right? Because they just don't think of you in that way. The whole relationship is that you're there for them, right? It's like a one-sided relationship. But also, when you do sit down and you try to help them and you go over the plan, that whatever it might be, that it seems like they came to you for help and they were genuine. And then the next day, the whole thing flips and it turns out they didn't even hear a word you said. Or as you're trying to help them, they speak over you, they speak louder, or they get defensive, or they tell you why this isn't going to work. that too becomes very frustrating, because at the end of the day, again, if you're with someone who truly has these characteristics, it's very hard for them to accept and take in something of value from somebody else for a number of different reasons. But one reason is that means that you've enriched my life. And if you enriched my life, that means that I have a need. And again, if someone is really narcissistic, they are without needs, because they're sort of above all that, and having needs and vulnerabilities is just too dangerous.
Right, right.
Gordon and I spoke a little bit, and I realized I had a lot of questions for Gordon because I was so excited to have him on the podcast. And I said to him, I don't think we're going to get through all of these, but I want everyone to know that next week I'm going to be on Gordon's show. So I think what we're going to do is, what we didn't cover was all of, what makes somebody vulnerable. I want to say a little bit more about that. Like, what makes someone vulnerable in terms of getting into this kind of relationship? And then over time, how does this begin to erode, or wear away your own identity, your own sense of competence, your own voice, going back to the wallpaper that you mentioned, Gordon, a little bit earlier. So we didn't get to that. And finally, what I love to talk about the most is what leads to genuine change and healing. And again, not just, it's up to anybody listening, it's always up to you whether you decide to stay or to go. But whatever you decide, no matter what, Gordon and I still need to talk about healing, because if you can heal, it is possible, then you're freer to make a decision whether you stay in this relationship or you inevitably leave. So I think that's a pretty robust agenda, which we could kick to our next recording, if that sounds good to you, Gordon.
Yeah, that sounds great. Sounds great. We'll do kind of a podcast swap here.
Yeah, this is great. And then I like this because it allows us to just have a little more space, like we're doing today, just to say, wait a minute, hold on. Let's go into this a little bit further. And we'll do some of that on Gordon's show next. And I'm going to put your link as well. Well, actually, maybe that's a good way to wrap it up. Is first, you could tell us, maybe, is there anything that we missed or anything that you want to review or really drive home before we wrap it up? And then where can people find you if they want to, take a bigger interest in your work?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think, that you bring on a really good point in that, Anthony, and that, a person ultimately needs to decide for themselves where they want to be and where they, like you said, stay in a relationship or leave the relationship. That's their decision to make. So, but, and that's a lot of, I'm sure, the work you do and also the work I do is really helping people navigate that, which is, there's no right answer to any of that.
There's still so much more to explore about this topic and related dynamics. If you're finding this discussion helpful and you want to learn more about the various facets of narcissism and related personality organizations, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video clip. If you want to do an even deeper dive, check out my podcast. I go into far more detail there. Okay, until next time, take care of yourself. Bye for now.